If you'd like to get early access to more videos like this and help decide what you'd like to see next, please consider joining the Patreon. The link is in the description. Hello everyone. Today's video is looking at the characters introduced in the 5th season of Thomas and seeing if they'd fit into the Railway series. Following on from the first episode about the very few new characters introduced in the first 4 seasons, there are now a lot more to talk about, so let's start straight away. One of my favourites is Derek, although he only appeared in one episode and later in a song. He is never named in the TV series, and in his episode he works with Bill and Ben at the clay pits. This would not work in the Railway series canon, as he would not be able to fit down the line under the low bridge. Derek is a Class 17, and these engines suffered poor performance under British Railways and were withdrawn very early. Their story is similar to that of the Class 28s, one example of which is Boko. The Fat Controller saw Boko's potential and managed to fix his engine problems, meaning Boko becomes a reliable part of the Northwestern Fleet. I imagine Sir Topham Hatt could do similar here. The Class 17s were withdrawn between 1968 and 1971 and all scrapped by 1975, except the one that's preserved, which gives a good window for the Fat Controller to negotiate a good price for a Class 17 and then cure its engine problems. Upon entering Northwestern service, Derek could perform rather like Boko too, supporting mainline traffic, but also working on Edward's branch line, where he would be around the twins. This works alongside his episode with Bill and Ben and his appearance in the music video, where he is working on the main line. His TV series model also sports the British Railways green livery that matches Daisy, Boko and Bear, so he already looks the part. I really like the idea of twin diesels, and so Ari and Bert are great additions to the TV series. They become permanent villainous residents of the island, but like Diesel, over time they do become a bit nicer. They carry the name Sodor Ironworks on their sides. This place does not exist in the Railway series, however there is another metalworks, the Aluminium Works up at Peel Godred. The Aluminium Works are at the end of the electric branch. It is likely that Ari and Bert would be privately owned and so are used around the Aluminium Works, but can also travel down the branch if needed. We know from an annual story that there are coal and water facilities along the line for steam engines, so there is also likely a fuel depot. As permanent residents of the island, I think a grumpy personality like that of George is more appropriate than an evil one. The Diesel twins are Class 08s, like Diesel, and are a great shout for the type of engine that would be readily available for shunting work. Plenty of these were made, so picking one up second hand for industry was common practice. The only possible change I would consider is their livery. Ari and Bert wear a shade of green that is not too far off British Railways green, and as privately owned engines this makes them look a little close to the Northwestern diesels. In some product ranges, their green is replaced with black, which I think works well, and also is like another privately owned diesel, Mavis. Bertram appears in one episode and is not seen again. He is said to be an old warrior due to his bravery, and once worked in a mine that closed down. When it is reopened, he is discovered and now takes visitors around. While working at a mine, probably one off the Mid-Sodor Railway isn't too far-fetched, the fact that Bertram is left to rust rather than being sold to another railway or scrapped entirely is quite silly, but the fact his crew still come to visit him is very outlandish. I think a more realistic way to tell Bertram's story and show his bravery is to have the character save some engines or mine workers who get into difficulty. His name is fine, but him being known as the Old Warrior, and also him running a line that passes through land once run by brave warriors, a name in honour of theirs, like Ogmund or Sigmund, would be a nice touch. His basis is the same as Duke's, but was apparently intended to be a tank engine. This makes more sense for an engine intended to work in mines. The George England engines, such as the one Duke is based on, were not initially supplied with tenders. A modification to add a bunker or bunkers could have worked, and kept the basis virtually the same. Rusty's Ghost engine is a narrow gauge engine that appears only in a ghost story told by Rusty. The engine falls off an old iron bridge on its way home, and sometimes haunts the bridge. In the shot of the engine crossing the bridge, it is portrayed with Skarloey's model, but a later vision of it looks more like Rennius. There is no bridge like this in the Railway series, the closest being the Rennius Viaduct. However, we do know that Skarloey and Rennius ran the line alone until the arrival of Sir Handel and Peter Sam, apart from the War Department diesels who were present during the war. So it would be harsh to add another engine to the roster, only to have it destroy itself. As it is Rusty telling the story, and as he was bought brand new for the Skarloey Railway from the manufacturers, I think it makes sense to say the story is one he heard while he was being built, and he later employs it as a teaching moment. Rusty was built by Rust and Hornsby, who mostly built diesel engines, but also built a lot of steam traction engines which could also make for interesting stories. Overall, the character makes for a good story, much like Percy's ghost in Ghost Train, but as there is no such thing as ghosts, the basis of this character is not very important. Old Slow Coach is the only coach or truck character introduced in Series 5. She is initially seen in the scrapyard in a terrible condition, after which she is rescued and turned into temporary accommodation for workmen. She is later restored to a working coach. To fit her into the railway series, she was likely built around 1893, and in her heyday would have worked on the Cornishman trains, possibly being hauled by the city of Truro. As other more modern coaches replaced her, she was gradually used on slower trains and branch line services until being withdrawn. This was the case for many 4-wheel, 6-wheel and bogie coaches over the years. Around the time the Fat Controller was looking for auto coaches to work on the Little Western, he found Old Slow Coach in a scrapyard. After purchasing her, she was slowly restored due to her advanced age and poor condition compared to the other Western coaches. After restoration, she can now be used on non-auto fitted services on the Little Western, such as mixed trains. If City of Truro ever revisited Sodor, I'm sure a reunion between the two would be a sweet moment. Much like Big Mickey, who appeared in a previous episode of this series, Cranky may be a crane too big for the island's needs. Sodor, reading between the lines, certainly mentions that the TV series Brendam Docks has heavier cranes than it would need. However, like with Big Mickey, I think Tidmouth Docks may well merit a crane the size of Cranky. In the railway series, Tidmouth has a big station, big sheds and a big harbour. The TV series moves the station to Knapford and the harbour to Brendam. Cranky's exact basis is unclear, but may well be based on a Stourton pit dock crane, perhaps from between the 1920s and 1950s. Although still too big for Brendam, Cranky is smaller than Big Mickey. I think these cranes would work well at Tidmouth Docks, which carries heavy industry. I also gave an in-reason universe for his name, making him a product of Cranky and Company cranes. I also added windows to the front of his cab, so his operator can see what they're doing. Speaking of vehicles with no operator windows, here is Thumper. As he is a freelance design with no real basis, it's hard to make a case for him being a railway series character. What I have done is moved his face from the front of his cab to his engine front, so both he and his driver can actually see what they're doing. In the show, he sort of punches a mountain to loosen rocks, and it is claimed that this helps collect the rocks faster. I think he could be reimagined or repurposed as some sort of bulldozer, as he already has a sort of plough at the front, but otherwise there is not a lot about Thumper that makes sense to use in the railway series. The 3 horrid lorries came to Sodor to try to replace the railways, but one by one they mess up and are all returned in sorry states. They are based on Foden lorries, and these were often used to transport goods from railway yards. I actually have a forthcoming video or two concerning these guys, and I think the episode is fairly close to how I would have them in the railway series. One problem I will bring up is that there are 3 lorries and none of them have a name. If there was only one lorry, that could just be referred to as the lorry, much like the diesel in Bowled Out. But all 3 makes it more confused. One suggestion is to give them all 3 similar sounding names. It worked for Bill and Ben, and it worked for Donald and Douglas. My suggestion is Horace, Morris and Norris. Horace sounds rather like horrid, and the other 2 names follow. These could be new characters who come to the island to compete with the railway, or a part of a company like the logistics division of Sodor Roadways if there is such a thing. Series 5 introduces more non-rail characters than it does rail ones, and here is another. Butch is a breakdown lorry that seems to have been cobbled together from parts of a Scammell Pioneer and a Scammell Constructor. He doesn't feature too often in the early seasons of the show, but becomes more prominent later on and joins the Search and Rescue Centre. In the railway series, a breakdown truck could have good story potential, rescuing a vehicle trapped on the line or having beef with a breakdown train. Another possibility is he works for an industrial company like AW Drive Tory Wreck or Thomas Cousins of Farquhar. For the next character, I'm going to include their driver as well as the character, as Tiger Moth's pilot really is the interesting one of the two. Tiger Moth is a biplane, who is said to be rude and dangerous, but the plane isn't the one admonished for this, it is his pilot. This takes agency away from the vehicle, and so if Tiger Moth appeared in the railway series, I'd like to see them interact personally. This isn't always the case of course, but it would be nice to have another flying character for Harold to interact with. The pilot speaks in the stereotypical RAF upper class accent that Harold has in the show. Although this isn't necessarily accurate to the real world, I like this idea and would keep it. Starting in this episode, I'll have some other new human characters to talk about, which is a nice change. In the Railway series, most of the human characters are minor at best, with the obvious exception of the Fat Controller. Old Bailey is a fogman who saves Henry from a nasty accident and is rewarded with the role of station master at an old station he wants to renovate. I think there are two ways of featuring Old Bailey in the Railway series which would work quite well. The first is by introducing a fog signalman for a story, as these are not featured in any Railway series story so far. Fog doesn't often play a part in these stories, but it's almost as dangerous as snow, and that weather condition is often featured. The next way Old Bailey could appear is as an elderly North Western Railway employee approaching retirement that the engines want to celebrate in a more slice-of-life story. The last character is Dowager Hat. She appears for the first time in the 5th series alongside her dog, who is later named Gremlin. In a sense, she is already a Railway series character, as Sir Topham Hatt would have had a mother, but as all 3 Fat Controllers are blended into one character in the TV series, it makes things a little tricky. She's a good character, but her comedic performance is a bit like that of the Fat Controller in the later series of the show. Good for TV, but not very accurate to the books. I also have a video which will be coming out soon, which looks closer at the whole histories of the Hat family. And lastly, Boulder. To be honest, I thought Boulder was way too big and spherical to be real, and was just using the show to demonstrate how action-packed a program about trains could be. However, these 2 tweets made me think differently. I'll link them in the description. Firstly, there is a spherical boulder mentioned in Railway Adventure by Tom Rolt from the Red Gin Tea. Secondly, there is a large round rock used for gold mining from Nick Train 123. Now, I don't think there is any real reason to include Boulder in the Railway series, but how interesting that there may be some basis for it in reality. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really like looking into these characters from the last series of the show I properly watched as a kid. In case you like this, I have a poll running on Patreon at the moment for the next character I should look into as part of my Railway series research series. And I'll be doing the Series 6 characters at some point too. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Patreon like these fine folk to help pick the next video subject, get early access to new content and help support the channel.